Welcome, everyone. Just giving everyone a few minutes to sign on. We'll begin in a moment. Okay, so welcome everyone to Lowe Connects, the last Leonardo, the story of its recovery and conservation. I'm Jody Seifer, I'm the curator of education. And we're really excited to have you all with us tonight. Just gonna go over a few logistical items. Just save the date for our next Lowe Connects, which will be on June 10th at 5:30. Peter Trippi, editor-in-chief of the Fine Art Carnosaur magazine, will tell us the story of Vanessa Bell and Gwen John, women who pushed the artistic envelope in early 20th century Britain. Really exciting stories, not only about the art that these women produced, but also about their lives and how sort of pioneers they were, both creatively and artistically in their field. So you can register for that free webinar as well at our website, lowe.miami.edu. When you click on it, immediately starting tomorrow, you'll see the Lowe Connects on the Lowe's website box, and it will take you to this screen. You'll just have to click register, and then you fill out the form and you'll get the details to sign on. That lecture, as well as this one, is sponsored by the Robert Lehman Foundation. We would like to thank them, as well as the Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, the University of Miami College of Arts and Sciences, and of course, we would like to thank Diane Modistini, our featured speaker for tonight. During the program, if you would like to have the live transcript option, you can click on your Zoom menu bar. You'll see a little box that says CC as well as live transcript. If you would like to have that on, you could just click that feature. As well as during the program, we invite you to type in your questions for Mrs. Modestini, and we'll address the questions at the end. Also, we wanted to make sure to tell you really quickly that there's going to be a lot of information here about this really fascinating story, but that there's even more extensive information on this really amazing website that was created, Salvator Mundi Revisited.com. And I believe Mrs. Modestini is going to share that with us at the end as well, but I did want to point that out. And also just one more reminder that at the end of this webinar, when you sign off, a survey will pop up, and we really greatly appreciate if you would take just a few moments to fill it out. Even if you filled out surveys for us in the past, it really does help us. We do read them, and they are really important for our grant reporting. So we thank you for that. And now I will turn the mic over to Beaux-Art Director and Chief Curator of the Lowe Art Museum, Dr. Jill Dupuy, who will introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you to all of my colleagues who are on this call and those who have been working assiduously behind the scenes, not just this evening, but many evenings over the course of the past 15 or so months. It's really a great privilege and pleasure of mine to be able to introduce Dianne Dwyer Modestini this evening. I've had the honor of working with Dianne for about a decade now through two successive press repositories. So again, I'm very, very honored and thrilled that she'll be speaking with us this evening. Dr. Modestini, Ms. Modestini is clinical professor and head of the CREST program in paintings conservation at the Conservation of the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University, which she founded in 1989. A graduate of Barnard College, she obtained her MA in the conservation of historic and artistic works from the State University of New York in 1973. Diane was a member of the Paintings Conservation Department of the Metropolitan Museum of Art under John Brealey from 1974 until 1987. She has lectured widely and, in addition to her publications on the Salvator Mundi, has written articles on the American painter John Kensett, the cleaning of paintings, and the materials and techniques of Italian paintings from the Crest collection. In 2018, she published a book based on a memoir of her late husband, Mario Modestini, who was one of the most distinguished restorers and connoisseurs of Italian painting of the 20th century. Now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to turn the proverbial mic over to Diane Modistini. Welcome, Diane.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Jody, for all your work organizing this behind the scenes. We've been trying to schedule this lecture for a couple of years now, so I'm very pleased that we finally are doing it this evening. So I will share my screen. Can everyone see the screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're all good. Sorry, Diane, I don't think we hear you. Oh, again. We heard you a second ago, but now we lost you for a moment. You're unmuted, so I'm not sure what it is.
Oh, can you hear me
There you
now?
go. Now we
Okay.
hear you.
Okay, I have a special microphone and it was muted. I just touched the button by mistake. Sorry.
Okay, you'll probably have
I
to start
apologize.
over. I don't think we heard any of what you
I
said.
apologize.
Sorry.
I will. Let's see. Okay. Okay. I apologize. I will start over again. Did you hear? I thank everyone, Jill for inviting me and Jody for setting this up. It's been a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm very pleased to have a chance to speak to everyone about this painting. Thank you for coming. Um, uh, in April of 2005, a painting of the Salvator Mundi was purchased by two New York art dealers from a small estate sale in New Orleans. It was cataloged as after Leonardo da Vinci. 3 years later, it was recognized by most of the leading scholars as the original lost composition. The discovery was stunning because there are only 15 or 16 fully accepted easel paintings by Leonardo in the world. Although scholars do not agree about the exact date of the painting, it is generally considered to be a late work begun around 1510 in Milan. As Leonardo did with several other paintings, he carried it around with him until the end of his life and continued to work on it until shortly before his death in 1519. Although there are no documents that record that it was with him in France, which I'll discuss later. Robert Simon, one of the dealers, who was also an art historian, who had purchased the painting, brought it to me shortly after the sale. It looked like this. There was a lot of amateurish retouching and a relatively recent varnish. I didn't have any idea what it was. I didn't know that there was a lost composition of this subject by Leonardo. I had a great deal on my mind, and I frankly wasn't all that impressed. But I had an easel at home and some basic restoration materials. I removed the varnish in retouching, both of which were recent and easily soluble. And later that day, I showed the cleaned painting to my husband, Mario Modestini. Mario was one of the great restorers and connoisseurs of Italian paintings of the last century. In 1966, when the National Gallery in Washington was interested in purchasing Ginevra de' Benci from the Prince of Liechtenstein, they asked Mario to go there to examine the painting. Here on the left, you can see photos of Mario in the castle in Vaduz. Mario had expert knowledge of the early period of Leonardo, as well as many of the painters in the workshop of Verrocchio, Leonardo's master. It had been suggested in the past by a couple of art historians that the portrait of Ginevra was by Lorenzo di Credi. It was another assistant of Verrocchio. Mario concluded that it was by Leonardo. Washington purchased the painting, and Mario later returned to Vaduz to bring it back to the National Gallery in a specially fitted Samsonite suitcase, which had its own seat in the first-class cabin under the name Mrs. Modestini. The price was $5 million, which was considered a record at the time. This is the painting after cleaning. In April 2005, Mario was 98 years old and in poor health. He had lost all interest in looking at paintings, but when I showed him the Salvator Mundi, he suddenly became alert. He held the panel for a long time, gazing at it intensely, and then said, "This is by a very great artist. I don't know who it is. Someone in the generation after Leonardo." I was stunned. Neither Mario nor I knew that there was a lost composition of the Salvator Mundi, nor of the many copies that had been made. There was only one late work by Leonardo to which it could be compared, the St. John the Baptist in the Louvre, which is obscured by so much discolored and blanched varnish that it is almost impossible to study. But Mario had an intuition about this painting. Soon after, it was sent to a specialist to remove the board and cradle that the original panel had been mounted to. This was a very lengthy procedure involving taking the panel apart completely. And by the time the painting was returned to me, Mario had passed away. From an inventory number on the frame and on the back of the cradle, this number 106, which you could see here is this is it crossed out, and the fragmentary label. Robert Simon figured out that the painting had come from a famous private collection in England assembled by Sir Francis Cook. Cook had purchased the painting in 1900 from an English dealer who had many sources, and it's not known where he acquired it. While in the Cook collection, the painting was cataloged as after Boltraffio, who was the most skilled of Leonardo's pupils. Nonetheless, Sir Francis's grandson, Sir Herbert Cook, who was an esteemed art historian and connoisseur of Italian Renaissance painting, noted in the catalog that he thought it was something better. It hung in the long gallery of Doughty House. This is it, the room of Doughty House is the arrow. This is the Salvator Mundi. And yeah, and this is what on the left. This photograph is what the Salvator Mundi looked like when it was in the Cook collection. Before the painting reappeared, based on this photograph, Martin Kemp described it as looking like a drug-crazed hippie. Um, and it's true that the face was grotesquely repainted, as were the curls on the proper right side. But many of the other passages were untouched and look much as they do now. Cook collection began to be sold off after the war. In 1958, the Salvator Mundi, along with a group of other paintings from the collection, was consigned to Sotheby's, where it was sold for £45. Later, reporters for the Wall Street Journal discovered that the buyers were an American couple from New Orleans, Warren and Minnie Kuntz. Mrs. Kuntz bequeathed it to her nephew, Basil Hendry, who kept it in the stairwell of his house in Baton Rouge until his death in 2004. Among the details in the painting that might have caused the many scholars and art dealers who saw it over the years in the Cook collection to take note are the curls, which are like a signature. On the left is a detail of the curls of the St. John the Baptist in the Louvre, and on the right of the Cook painting, clean. The difference in color and clarity is due to the extremely yellow and cloudy varnish on the St. John. But if you look at them carefully, you see that this is absolutely the same hand. However, no one noticed this or some of the better preserved passages, and so the painting disappeared for almost 50 years. Again, the clean state. You can see that the blessing hand is very beautifully preserved, as is the cuff, some of the knot work, and these are the curls on the these curls are very well preserved. The head is very badly damaged. The most obvious damage is a split which traverses the entire length of the panel. Like St. John the Baptist and other works painted in Milan, the Salvator Mundi is on a single plank of walnut. For some reason, this particular piece of walnut is of very poor quality. Wood cells continue to expand and contract, absorbing and releasing moisture long after the tree has been cut down. Some paintings on panel are more reactive than others and have to be free to respond to these changes. When their movement is constrained, they split. Leonardo inserted his panels in a working frame before applying the preparation, which he describes and also illustrates in this page from one of his transcribed notebooks. This is from Richter's translation. And the Salvator Mundi retains most of its original edges. And they're especially clear on the bottom where the edge hasn't been repainted, that you can see this reserve of wood, the part that would have gone into the slots in the frame, and a white line, which is the accumulation of the two thin layers of preparation. Leonardo wrote that the working frame would allow the wood to expand and contract according to the humidity. But wood doesn't move in only one direction. It also warps, and the working frame would have restricted its movement, causing a split to develop. The damage is very clear in the X-ray, which the X-ray also, this sort of spectral appearance is very characteristic of late works by Leonardo. When the wood split, it sprung, and one side of the panel became higher than the other, creating a step. At some point, in order to correct this misalignment, the painting was planed down from the front. This is an incredibly brutal way to treat a painting, but it was apparently not uncommon in England during the 18th and the 19th century. I was told that many Tudor portraits from English country houses suffered the same fate. Other losses of color are due to insect infestation, who ate away the wood underneath the panel, underneath the paint, which subsequently collapsed. There was also some abrasion of the final glazes, especially in the area of the chin and in the orb. This kind of overcleaning, removal of original final modeling layers is caused by using strong solvents and alkaline reagents during a cleaning in the past. Um, the other alteration, which changes the character of the painting very much, is the blue robe, which was painted with natural ultramarine, which is obtained from lapis lazuli. It has blanched, and it's very difficult to read the folds. This is called ultramarine sickness, and it's pretty much ubiquitous in works of Leonardo containing containing lapis. You see the Virgin of the Rocks in London and Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, and other painters who used natural ultramarine together with oil. And lastly, the entire background has been repainted brown. This is a detail of the worst area of damage. The marks left by the sharp blade of the plane are clearly visible. In the area of the split, the blade has cut deep into the wood, and the sloppy workman also shaved off quite unnecessarily areas of intact paint right down to the preparation. And the forehead, these are some of these sort of tongue-shaped losses with old restorations are, I believe, due to insect tunneling. The upper part of the hair was removed by a combination of strong solvents and scraping. The area below the chin, as you can see, is also, there are, discrete losses, but and um, and areas where the plane has scraped off paint, but there's also abrasion and loss of the final modeling layers in the neck and to a lesser degree, but also relatively significantly in the chest, where the pink underpaint is exposed. The crystal orb was painted with thin glazes over the blue drapery. Most of the glazes are gone entirely, except for the lower part of the orb, which was painted with stumbles of lead white over the flesh tone, and this has survived. In this passage, Leonardo carefully described the inclusions in the crystal. They are so precisely rendered that crystallographers have been able to identify the orb as quartz. There are so few traces of the original glazes in the upper part that it is impossible to imagine how all of this combined, but given the care Leonardo lavished on every passage of this picture, the effect must have been quite marvelous. Some art historians think that this is actually glass and that these are air bubbles, because large crystal spheres are not known to have existed in Europe in this period. Leonardo's notebooks don't describe any observations of crystal formations, but two geologists who studied the painting and with whom I corresponded extensively, I think that he must have studied crystal formations because the inclusions are so realistic. This was of great interest to them because crystal was not characterized until a century later um, by a Danish scientist called Nicolaus Steno, who's known as the father of crystallography. Um, the writer Walter Isaacson accepted that it was crystal, but he created quite a stir when he published his book, claiming that there was a mistake, that Leonardo made a mistake because images seen through a crystal sphere should be reversed, turned upside down. Um, and the press made quite a lot of this, but it wasn't true because that effect only applies when there's a certain distance between the sphere and the object. When it's held close to the body, as it is here, there would have been some magnification and distortion of the drapery folds behind, something similar to something like this, like the distortions that in this unfinished painting by Dora in the Metropolitan Museum, which was influenced by the Salvator Mundi of Leonardo. The full extent of the damage to the head is recorded in this infrared image. I said I left some of these older restorations in the nose and in the forehead because they were not discolored and they were useful bases. But this is not why we usually use infrared, not usually to record damages, but instead to penetrate the upper layers of paint and hoping to find underdrawing, which is done with carbon black, which is strongly absorbed by infrared wavelengths. Often one can see underdrawing or volvido, which are these tiny dots that were left by the transfer of the design from a cartoon. However, this is very difficult to see in works by Leonardo, especially later ones. You do see that in Ginevra de' Benci, which is an early work, because he used a lot of, he used black a lot. He mixed black into most of his paint mixtures. In fact, he was criticized for this by his contemporaries. However, we could make out a few. You can't see them here, but if you had the actual digital image, you could see there are a few dots above the upper lip, and there are also some. I could make out some in the knotwork pattern. The other one can also the other thing one sees with infrared are changes in the composition known as pentimenti. And there are quite a few in the Salvator Mundi. And although we could see some of them in visible light, this shift in the position of the stole, for example, and perhaps a lower position of the band of embroidery across the bodice, as well as change in the position of the hand holding the orb, which I'll talk about later. You'll see it more clearly. It's very hard to make out, as I said, because of this abundant use of black in Leonardo's mixtures, but it's helpful nonetheless. The blessing hand revealed in infrared, revealed a thin underlayer of black paint, which is invisible in normal light. Numerous art historians were very impressed by this and have speculated that Leonardo may have originally conceived of the hand in a lower position, similar to the hand in this painting by Marco Doggiono of the Salvator Mundi at the Borghese Gallery in Rome. Marco Doggiono was a pupil of Leonardo. There However, there's no other evidence of a change of the position in the hand. I mean, there's a reserve for it. And when we looked at a cross section, which is another method we use to study pictures, these are minuscule samples of paint which are embedded in resin, which when it cures can be ground down until a cross section of the paint sample is exposed, which reveals the different layers. And this black here is this layer that you can see in the infrared image. And it is very, very tiny particles of bone black. Very, very, very thin and I think just applied as a wash. What we can also see is the, how many different layers of flesh tone he used, each one containing the same pigments, but of a slightly different, in slightly different quantities, which is also a very meticulous and unusual thing to see in paintings of this period. And there's another cross section of which shows the care like Leonardo lavished on every aspect of this painting. This is the black background, which has, this is the initial layer of this kind of soot-like material. And then there are 4 other layers of mixtures of blacks, different types of blacks, which different black pigments that were, which are obviously important to him to achieve a certain effect of, it must have been a very, very rich velvety black. And on top of that, you can see a layer of green paint, which was added later. And I'll get back to that later on. Another change in the composition was a preliminary idea for the knotwork pattern. Again, you can see it pretty well in just in visible light. And this is my colleague Sean Kwong created this graphic so that you could visualize the design more easily. And it corresponds to a design in one of Leonardo's notebooks. He just seems to have been kind of doodling around with it here because there's only this one piece of it. It doesn't continue. And he ultimately decided on a much more complex knotwork pattern, as you can see, which is executed with such care that you can see the volume of each thread and the way it catches the light. In all the copies of the picture that repeat this same knotwork pattern, the lines just crisscross. It's just one layer of paint. These are actually underpainted with grisaille and then glazed and then highlights added. It's a quite remarkable. And he didn't do that in the knotwork in any other painting either. So this is the blessing hand. There was a pentiment that was revealed as soon as I removed the varnish of another position of the thumb. At one point when someone was ever, scraped the background, probably did this, was I just removed the original background and this thumb, which Leonardo had canceled, appeared. And there's also a slight shift in the whole position of the hand towards the edge. And it's also interesting to see how he built up the curls. These are the few remnants of the original curls on the proper right side. The glazes, final glazes had been removed, and the grisaille underpaint is exposed. This was then glazed over. As I said, there's grisaille under the knotwork as well. Um, I'm often asked at what moment I became 100% convinced that the painting was by Leonardo. Um, because, I mean, after all, there were many indications that the painting was not a copy of mainly of the Pentimenti. But when I was attempting to restore a particular damage in the mouth, and I had done it over at least 10 times, and I could not achieve this almost invisible transition. I looked at a detail of the Mona Lisa and when of the mouth, and then that's when I had to, I had to admit to myself that that it could only be by Leonardo. You might ask why it took me so long. Yeah, Leonardo is such a rare artist that advocating for a new attribution is extremely difficult and rather scary. Um, uh, it it will be met with extreme skepticism, and many people will simply think that you have gone mad. So it's had to be really very, very sure about one about one's own opinion, and not just say, oh well, it has Pentimenti, therefore it must be by Leonardo. It has been widely asserted that I painted most of the picture, which is ridiculous. Because there was intact paint on either side of most of the larger losses, including all the glazes and the final modeling. By very carefully building up layers which imitated the original layer structure with a tiny brush and editing constantly and removing anything that seemed to go over original paint or created a different shape. I was able to bridge between, and create a transition um, between the two areas of intact original paint. This is an image of the painting in ultraviolet light after the restoration. Ultraviolet light causes certain substances like varnishes, certain pigments, certain mediums to fluoresce, which is to say that they exhibit a light color. Here, the fluorescence, much of this bluish, greenish fluorescence is from an old varnish, which I did not remove, which was kind of unevenly removed in the past. You can see it's gone here in the area of the thumb. It's gone over much of the face, but the but retouches don't fluoresce. They absorb the ultraviolet light. They reflect the ultraviolet light and look black. So everything in the head and so on that's black are my retouches. And so this is the answer to how much of the painting is by Leonardo and how much of it is by me. And it's not 90% by me. The attribution to Leonardo has been controversial, which is to be expected. Most of the experts have accepted that it is autograph. Some think maybe not entirely, but partly. But it's any case, it's if the picture were available, of course, it would be easier to just to for people to come to a conclusion. Um, the until 1964, it wasn't clear. Art historians did not believe that there was a painting by Leonardo of the Salvator Mundi. Then Ludwig Heidenreich, who's a great Leonardo scholar, proposed that there was a lost original, which he based on uh, on a close study of the numerous copies of two drapery studies by Leonardo himself and an etching by Wenceslaus Haller, which was made in 1650, which is inscribed in the lower left on Leonardo da Vinci paints it. Leonardo da Vinci painted this. Um, the Haller engraving has been a sort of touchstone for the appearance of the original. One point of contention about the attribution is that in the Haller engraving, the Salvator Mundi has a very full beard and a mustache, actually. This is the Orthodox representation of the appearance of Jesus Christ, which in the which in the Middle Ages there was a document that was believed to be a contemporary description of Christ's appearance, and he had a beard. He's described as having a beard. Um, the document was proved to be a forgery in the 15th century, but nonetheless, this continued to be the sanctioned version of Christ's appearance. Beardless images of the mature Christ are extremely rare after the 9th century. There are a few. So the question is, if the etching represents the lost original, why does it look so different from the Cook painting? There are at least 25 copies and versions of the Salvator Mundi. These are three of the better ones. In 1978, the one at the left was proposed as as autograph, as the lost original, based mainly on its similarity to the Haller engraving. But this attribution was not widely accepted. I mean, the quality is just not good enough. The other two versions were once considered to be by pupils of Leonardo. They're both on oak, which can be accurately dated with the science called dendrochronology, which studies the growth rings in wood samples. Both these pictures were studied with dendrochronology. The copy in the middle, which had been attributed for years to Cesare da Sesto, turned out to have been painted after 1586. And the one on the right, which had been attributed to Gian Pietrino, turned out to have been painted in after 1569. And both painters were long dead when these copies were made. But all of the copies tend to have a fairly full beard. There's one exception. This copy from a church in Naples, which, apart from the color of the robe, closely resembles the Cook painting, although it is by a far less accomplished artist, no doubt. It nonetheless, I always found, had a certain presence, and there were some small differences between this picture and the Cook painting that made me wonder if it was by an associate of Leonardo or a pupil who had access to the original in his studio before it was finished. I went to Naples to examine it with a group of scientists. The panel was a single plank of walnut, as it should be if it were painted in a workshop in Milan. The knotwork design was transferred from a cartoon. Um, um, this cartoon had the holes, the prick holes are so tiny and closely spaced that it is extraordinary. You can see them. It continued the pouncing, as it's called, of the cartoon continued beyond the point where the not where the skull was actually going to be painted. So you can see them down here. I think you can make them out maybe pretty clearly also in this part, but anyway, you can see them here. They're very small, and this, and if you put this knotwork design, if you overlay it with the knotwork design of the Salvator Mundi, they match almost exactly. Um, and it also turned out that there are traces of a beard here, in the form of small, sparse, light-colored curls, these corkscrew uh, curls, which are characteristic of Leonardo's and Verrocchio's workshop. They're very light in color. It's hard to see them because they're almost the same color as the flesh tone. They would have been somewhat more visible uh, before the paint became more translucent. Um, but it's kind of a compromise. In the original, this is the same area, although it's very badly damaged. If these types of curls, which are really, corkscrew curls, they're not just, lines, and, ambiguous lines that are supposed to stand in for a beard. And they're painted with some body color, there would still be some trace of them, and there's nothing. Um, and there is evidence in Leonardo's work for a bearded Christ. This study by Leonardo for the head of Christ in the Last Supper, which is in the Brera, definitely does not have a beard. The original mural is so badly damaged that it's really impossible to tell one way or the other. All of the copies of The Last Supper by other artists have added a beard, but again, this was the conventional representation of Christ. The most interesting observation I was able to confirm is that the position of the hand holding the orb in the Naples painting corresponded to the initial position of the hand in the original that Leonardo later changed. This graphic on the left shows traces the position of the fingers before Leonardo moved them in the from the infrared scan, and that is superimposed over tracings from the green tracing is of the hand of the original. The red tracing is from the hand of the Naples painting. And you can see that the Naples picture, the two fingers line up pretty well with the first position of the hand. And you can see it when you look at them together side by side. You can see that the fingers are raised slightly. This change that Leonardo made was quite small. The fingers were slightly raised as they are here, and he lowered them a bit. And it's interesting to compare these three copies which all correspond in some way to the Holler engraving. The Naples picture has a completely different cuff. And this painter has also finished the rest of the sleeve. Leonardo, he added this cuff, but he never finished the sleeve. This is just a black hole. And he didn't finish this part either. There should be drapery here. And this is very typical of him, of not finishing things. He always left something unfinished. And the Ganet instead, the drapery of the cuff is a little bit different. It's generally the same. He's left the same hole here for the sleeve. And the other thing about the Naples picture is that the band of embroidery that goes across the bodice is lower. And I don't know if you remember, but in the infrared, it seems there seems to have been an initial position, lower position of also of the in the Cook painting. So, and so I think that Naples painter, he just invented a piece of drapery because when he saw this painting, it hadn't been finished yet. And this is not untypical of this kind of what Martin Kemp refers to as leakage of paintings from Leonardo's studio via either cartoons or by his pupils, who then go out and make copies of them. The black background, as I mentioned, had been repainted green at some stage. There were residues of green paint around the fingers and around the shoulder on the other side. There was not much left of it. It had been scraped off. Where the verdigris was intact, so was the original background. So I have a theory that the green background was added in the 16th century, and possibly in France, which would make the provenance that was proposed for the painting of it having been in the collection of Charles I, being brought to England by his wife, Henrietta from France. It makes sense because the verdigris was a pigment that an historic pigment that wasn't hardly used after 1600, but very much used in backgrounds for paintings by Italian painters. It's this door at the Met again. Here it is with this green background. This is the Salviati. This is Corneille de Lyon. It was particularly popular in France. Practically all French portraits have these green backgrounds of the 16th century. So this is a little bit frivolous, but this is sort of what if you can imagine that someone painted the background of the Salvator Mundi, this bright green, and it would have looked something like this. And then I really began to wonder at some point if the fact that the area of around the area around the chin, where a beard would be, is so damaged compared to the rest of the and in a different way than the rest of the face, is because there was a beard that was scraped off in the clean state. There's also scraping kind of in the form of a halo around the top of the head. So the effect of a green background, a beard, a halo would have made what is a rather disquieting androgynous image of Christ more conventionally pious at a time when in France there were bloody religious wars that raged throughout the 16th century. Um, Another argument that's raised by those who are skeptical about the attribution is that there are no contemporary documents to prove that a painting by Leonardo ever existed. But this is also true of other paintings by Leonardo. But if if Leonardo had the painting with him in France, um, there was a visit in 1518. The Cardinal d'Aragona, who was involved with, very much involved with the papacy, um, and with, he'd made a trip to the north to figure out what was going on with this Lutheranism, and on the way back, he and his secretary visited uh, at, Leonardo at the chateau in Clou in Amboise. The secretary kept a diary, and he wrote that they had been shown 4 paintings: the Mona Lisa, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, St. John the Baptist, and La Belle Ferronnière, which are all now in the Louvre. The Salvator Mundi should have been there. And I wonder if Leonardo, who was described by Vasari as an atheist, uh, and would have felt fairly safe in the free-thinking atmosphere of the court of Francis I, might have chosen not to show such a radical image of Christ to a conservative cardinal of the Catholic Church, and ambassador of the Pope on the eve of the Protestant Reformation. There is an enigmatic note in the Codex Atlanticus, which dates from around 1506, in which Leonardo writes, "When I made a Christ child, you put me in prison, and now if I show him grown up, you will do worse to me." The punishment for heresy, even for, using the wrong phrase, was to be burned at the stake. The painting was included in the Great Leonardo exhibition in London in 2011. After that, it was purchased through Sotheby's private sales by an anonymous buyer who turned out to be Yves Bouvier, an agent for the Russian oligarch Dmitry Rybolovlev. Bouvier pocketed $1 billion flipping paintings to his client, which is another story, which is still playing out in various law courts. Rybolovlev never exhibited the painting while he owned it. And it would just spent its time in various free ports. When it is reportedly, when he discovered that he had been overcharged by a huge markup by Bouvier, Rybolovlev was disgusted and discouraged and decided to sell his collection, including the Salvator Mundi. Most of the other works were 20th century pictures. My great surprise, in the summer of 2017, I received a phone call from his new representative, and the Salvator Mundi arrived in my studio in New York. The plan was that Christie's would offer it in the November sale of modern and contemporary art. It was billed as the last Leonardo, and Louis Guzer, the really brilliant head of the contemporary department, mounted a sophisticated publicity campaign. As everyone knows, it fetched a record price of $450 million, including fees. I hoped that it would go to a museum, but when I saw the price, I began to become nervous that that was not the case. And unfortunately, the buyer was once again anonymous. In late December, Reporters for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times revealed that the buyer was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, acting through a surrogate, Prince Bader, who shortly thereafter was appointed Minister of Culture, which he is still. Prince Bader is Minister of Culture. Um, and this revelation came at a very embarrassing moment for the Saudis um, when the Crown Prince had many of his cousins locked up in the Ritz-Carlton. And the Saudis denied the story. And then when presented with the evidence, said that it was a gift for the Emir of Abu Dhabi, who was bin Salman's mentor, and it would be exhibited at the museum there. It never appeared in Abu Dhabi. There was a great deal of speculation about whether or not the Salvator Mundi would appear in the Louvre's exhibition to mark the 500th anniversary of Leonardo's death. It never appeared. A recent French film claimed that the reason was that the Louvre didn't accept the attribution. I knew this wasn't true because I had been in various discussions with the curator of that exhibition, and I knew that he accepted the attribution, and that he very much hoped to borrow it. What I did not know was that the Louvre had published a catalog dedicated to the painting, which was suppressed when the loan was not granted. But a few copies circulated, one of which, just by an odd coincidence, I saw. In this catalog, the attribution to Leonardo was fully accepted. The conclusion was arrived at based on comparisons to the two copies that we've looked at, the Gannet and the Naples copies. And although they like the Gannet better than I do, but and technical studies of the materials and techniques, which corresponded to other paintings by Leonardo in the Louvre's collection that had been analyzed. There are not really any new discoveries, but the Louvre's endorsement is clearly important. Why would the Crown Prince of a Muslim country, whose religion forbids making of images of sacred figures, want to own the Salvator Mundi? It is definitely a trophy, and it will draw visitors to the museum he intends to build. It is also an image that emanates power. Salvator Mundi is a very remote divinity. He expresses no kindness nor interest in the petty activities of the human race. He is all-knowing and gazes inward, holding the entire cosmos in one hand. He exists outside of time and space. A prince might see himself reflected in this image. It also arouses strong feelings in many people, some of which were recorded in this video that you're watching, which Christie's made for the exhibition. They mounted a camera underneath the frame. And I have seen these reactions myself, looking at people seeing it in the exhibition in London. There are, and by many people who have written to me about the effect the painting has had on their lives. That that people react. You see expressions of fear, of sorrow, of awe, of wonder, and tears. It's tragic that the painting is so badly damaged, but also tragic that both the owners have refused to share it with the public. The painting is Leonardo's spiritual testament. He labored over it for years, refining the details to an extent that he did not do in any of his other paintings. I believe that it is his masterpiece. Despite the state, his great genius still dominates. A painting like this belongs to mankind, and I hope that one day it will be displayed again somewhere. The Saudis say that they are building a series of museums, and one of them will be for Western art. And they will, and the Salvator Mundi will be shown there. But it's not the first museum they intend to build. So we're going to have to wait a while. If you want to know, there's a huge amount of information about this painting. There's a great deal. I realize it's complicated and difficult to sort out. I've put everything, all the information that I have and that I know in this website. And then there's a group of Danish filmmakers have been working on a film about the Salvator Mundi for the past several years. They've interviewed a great many people. They've now sold it to Sony, who is going to show it at the Tribeca Film Festival in June, and then in theaters this summer. I think it's very balanced. It's very good. Again, there are certain things, you can't tell the whole story. There are things that are, that are left out, but it's, I think it's extremely well done and very beautifully filmed. I think the cinematography is beautiful. So, yeah. So that's all if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Let me see, there are 4 here. Don Derez says, did you compare the mouth or other features of Ginevra to the Mona Lisa and the Salvatore? Comment about the painting on the back of Ginevra. Of course, Ginevra is much earlier, considerably earlier. So it has features that are, the features are much more clearly defined. Leonardo hadn't really fully developed this sfumato technique that he uses in his later works. The painting on the back of the Ginevra, that device of, which is thought to be Pietro Bembo's device. I don't know. I don't think it's by Leonardo, but it's old. As you know, the painting's been cut. Ginevra's been cut down on the bottom. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diane. I did have some questions as well that I didn't type in, but I wondered, I read a little bit on the website. You speak a little bit about the light that Leonardo da Vinci talks about and how you working on it in your North Light studio was so crucial. I've wondered if you might speak to that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, Leonardo, in his treatise on painting, describes how a studio should be set up. And he talks about where the light should come from. And he and then he says that the light should come from high up, and it should come from your left, and the best time to paint was just when the light was beginning to fail, because at that moment everything took on much more form. And it was true of the Salvator Mundi at that time of day, in the natural north light. It it gained in volume. It was quite striking. And because that was obviously the light that Leonardo used, that preferred to paint in. And we so overlight paintings today in museums, and it really is, these artificial lights and so on. They really flatten things out, flatten the images out. So yeah, of course we can't have just natural light, but yes, but I did. Yeah, but it was definitely a phenomenon I noticed with the Salvator Mundi. Um, that most paintings look better, um, when the light begins to go down a bit, but they don't change in the same way that the Salvator Mundi did.
Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you. And on that note, I wonder if I don't know if you even can, but I'm so curious to know how it felt for you to, I imagine you spent a lot of alone time, if you could say that, with this work of art, and how that felt.
Yeah, well, I worked on it I worked on it continuously for 2 years, and then I had it back again at various points. And because I mentioned it was when I got the painting back from the panel worker, um, Mario, had died recently, and so I've always, this very strong connection between this painting and Mario because of his reaction to it, and because it was the last picture that he ever did react to. So, um, and because we worked together, um, um, often, and in this, and would, I could, I could hear him. And there was nobody to talk to about this. So I, I just kind of carried on a dialogue with Mario in my head, kind of, about what, how I should approach this and what I should do, and whether this was working or whether or not. And yeah, so yeah, he's very much part of the painting for me. That I don't think I could have done it without him.
Thank you for sharing that really personal and obviously emotional story. There's just one other question I think that Victoria wanted to know, again, the name of the method the English used to correct the raised wood that you mentioned on the other paintings earlier.
The English used that
She says, what is the name of the method the English used to correct the raised wood that you mentioned?
they planed it. They planed it down from the front. You know what a plane is? That you shave wood down with. Has a handle and a sharp blade um, that protrudes, and you set the depth of the cut according to how how much the blade comes out. Yeah, they used it. That's what it looks like. Is that they used a plane on it too? Is that what she means? Yeah.
I'm not sure, Victoria. I don't know if you want to answer that in your. Yes, she says, yes, I do. Now it's clearer to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah. It's not an accepted method.
Yeah.
It's it was yeah, no. And so we don't know where the picture was, but probably, I mean, from the cradle, and from the way that it was treated, it probably was in England when Cook bought it, went from this dealer. So
Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, but I'm seeing lots of comments of thank you, and people are commenting on your
My
cute
puppy.
video. He's rolling
Yeah.
around on the couch in the
Yeah, a
background.
little show because she's waiting for her dinner. Dinner, I know.
And I want to thank you so much for this amazing and enlightening, fascinating presentation. And I can't wait to read more about it and see the film.
Yeah, the film's really good. Yeah, and yeah, it's an hour and a half, but it really goes quickly. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for your time. And thank you everyone for attending. And we hope to see you at the next Lowe Connects on June 10th. And this this recording will be available on the Lowe's YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to that, we appreciate that as well.
Good. Thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, thank you, Jody.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.